Welcome to the Miller Report. I'm Suzanne Miller, CEO of Empire State Properties and host of the Miller Report. Last week, we had Eric Adams on the Miller Report, and the week before, we had Governor Cuomo. Today's guest grew up in Peekskill, New York. His family's from Hungary. In 1963, he graduated Yale University. In 1970, he graduated Columbia Law School. And in 1994, he became governor of New York, where he defeated Mario Cuomo, and he became a 3-term governor. Welcome, George Pataki, to the Miller Report. Thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you, Suzanne. I've been looking forward to this for a long time and happy to be on.
Thank you so much. First of all, Governor, thank you for what you did, and we're going to get into a lot. But now that you're not in politics, how do you spend your time?
I'm still in politics, not an active, not holding elected office, but I still care a lot. And candidates who I like, I will do my best to try to help. And I think we all have that obligation, and certainly I do. So many people help me that I have an obligation now to help those I think would be good for the city, the state, or the country. So I'm still doing that. But then I'm still counsel with a great global law firm. I'm headed off to Australia with them in a couple of days right after Thanksgiving to do some business development. And I have my Pataki Center where we've been trying to do our best to help first the people in Ukraine when that horrible war occurred, and now we're trying to help with Israelis as well, given the Gaza war that's ongoing. So we're just trying to continue to do what I can do to try to help make things a little better.
Well, we're going to get into all of those subjects, which is fantastic. But when you were the governor, you've accomplished so many great things, and I really mean this from my heart. You cut taxes for 12 years in a row. You made New York City really feel safe. You created charter schools. And most importantly, you were successful in fighting terrorism. So what do you think your biggest accomplishment was after all those things I said?
Crime. No question. I thought that before I got elected governor, while I was governor, and I think it today. The most important thing by far government does is provide for the safety of its people. And New York was failing miserably when I ran for office. You remember 2,200 murders in New York City. And when people look at the dramatic change, they look at New York City, Bloomberg and Giuliani and Bratton, and they all deserve credit. But I can tell you, we changed over 100 criminal justice laws in Albany. We completely changed the criminal justice system. We changed the judges. We changed parole. We changed sentencing. And we went from being the most dangerous state in America to, I think it was the third safest. Utah and Iowa were safer than New York. And that's the most important thing government does. And right now, sadly, they've undone most of these reforms, and we've gone from being a place where you could walk in Harlem in the middle of the night and feel safe to where you're not safe in midday in Midtown. And it's just tragic to see this happening.
I agree we've come so far, but let's just go back to September 11th, which for me personally was such a tough day. I mean, my late husband passed away a few months later. So this really, and I lived in Battery Park City, and Empire State Properties rebuilt the area. Yeah. But you united us. You were the person we would watch, and you made us feel safe. The real estate market went down, but just for a nanosecond. Within 6 months, it went back up 20%. So if you were the governor again right now, how would you unite us again? And that's really a big question, because that is what we need.
Uniting people isn't that hard when you lay out exactly where you want to go. It's not a question of having a budget and, I dislike this or I like that. It's a question of having a vision as to where you want to be. And my vision was very simple. I wanted to make New York State the safest state. I wanted to make New York City, again, a place where young people from around the country wanted to be. I wanted to make sure our schools worked and our health system worked. And I just laid out that vision. And when you do that, almost everybody's in agreement with those ideals. And right now, where's the vision? What's the sense of where we as a city or as a state are headed? Where are we as a country headed? There isn't that view over the horizon of what we can accomplish when we work together. And of course, September 11th, one of the only positives that came out of that was that sense of unity. We didn't have the sense that we were Republicans, Democrats, black, white, north, south, young, old. We were New Yorkers. We were Americans. We had been attacked, and we were going to stand together. And if there's one thing that is most disappointing to me about our city and country today, it's how divided we are. We lost that sense that we're all in this together. We're still all in it together. We just don't understand that.
So, Governor Pataki, I'm going to ask you again, let's roll back. Let's say you are the governor today because we all agree you did a fantastic job. We're giving you the keys. How are you going to unite us?
I lay out exactly what I want to do in criminal justice to make the streets safer. And by the way, not just the streets safer, so that you can go into a drugstore and don't have to get them to unlock the toothpaste. I mean, these quality of life issues matter, and the violent crime issues, of course, matter as a matter of life and death. So I lay out a vision of how we can be the safest city and state in the country again. We did it before, and we'll do it again. The second is people have to have confidence in our future. We tax too much, we regulate too much, we don't do enough to improve the quality of life. And you know as well, probably better than I do, in the last few years, $1 trillion in managed capital has moved from New York to Florida. And that's going to continue unless we lay out that future that people can say, yes, I want to get there. We have to cut taxes. They're too high. It's that simple. And I know that the city and the state face a budget deficit. But Suzanne, when I got elected, I knew state government well, but one of the few surprises was I was left with a $5 billion deficit that nobody knew about. Back when $5 million was a lot of money. It doesn't, now we've seen so much inflation, it doesn't seem that much, but it was a huge amount of money. And everybody said, well, you're going to have to raise taxes. And I said, no, we're going to have to cut taxes. And they thought I was out of my mind. But when you create a better business climate, when you have more taxpayers, when you have more jobs, when you have more companies, even at a lower tax rate, you get higher tax revenue. And it worked. And as you said, we cut taxes all 12 years, $147 billion more than the other 49 states combined. And at the end, we had surpluses. We had increased funding for schools and education and health care. And we had surpluses while cutting taxes. And it would work again. You know what's so frustrating to me, Suzanne, is it's not like this is some brand new magic formula that people will say, well, maybe it worked, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. We did it. It worked. It would work again today. You tell a business that's on the ropes, are they going to expand in New York, or going to then move it out of the state, that this is what the future's going to like. We're going to cut taxes the next 5 years. We're going to have safer streets. We're going to have a cleaner environment. And they're going to say, okay, I'll give you a chance.
I'm really laughing, Governor, because I promised everybody, he did not see these questions beforehand, but my next question was going to be, how do we keep businesses here? And you actually answered that, because New York is based on tourism and corporations. And if we can't get those people here to help us, then this is really an issue. So to address the businesses, so what is it, 500,000 people left in the last 2 years? I think it's 500,000 people.
Probably.
So you think that if we cut the taxes and we make the streets safer, then we're going to get the companies to stay, because we do need the companies.
New York, I think, is still the best place in the world. But it has to be competitive. And people have to have a sense that the future is going to be better than it is today. And they don't have that sense. And when I got elected, I knew we couldn't cut all the taxes at once. We passed a bill cutting taxes over the next 3 years. And I went around before I took office, met with the CEOs of all these big companies saying, look, this is what I'm going to do. Give me a chance. And I'll never forget, I got elected. This is ancient history. Before I take office, I get elected, and I'm going around the state meeting with the CEO saying, this is my vision for New York. Give me a chance. Don't leave. And I met with the head of IBM. And they sat down and showed me a map. And it had their world headquarters. And it had a line, and then it had some vacant land. And they go to me, do you know what that line is? And I go, I don't know. It's on a survey. It's probably a stone wall. And they go, it's the state line between New York and Connecticut. We haven't told anybody, but we're looking to build our world headquarters on the other side of that line. Why shouldn't we do it? And by the way, they also said they had, whenever they had a chance, they moved every single job out of New York State without ever announcing it. So I just laid out the vision, and today they have their new world headquarters. They've invested billions of dollars in chip manufacturing plants. So it works. And, how is it that people who have seen two models, one works, one doesn't work, and they go for the one that doesn't work? you know, I get passionate about this because I spent my whole life trying to make this a better city and state, and to see so much of it unraveling for no good reason is really frustrating.
I couldn't agree, but maybe we'll be able to fix it together. And that's one of the things we do day to day by the Miller Report and people like you speaking out. I want to talk to you about real estate, because real estate is really the fundamental thing that keeps most cities, particularly, and I keep saying this, New York, vibrant. And we need this. We need developers to build. We need affordable housing. Let's tackle 421A for a minute, which is, I ask everybody on the Miller Report about 421A. Are you a proponent, and what do you think about that it's not been renewed?
Yeah, I think it's just disappointing that you need tax incentives, particularly when everything else is so difficult. It's not just 421A; it's what they did on rent control. You know, the idea that not only are we not going to see buildings going up the way we should in New York, because this is New York, we're going to see older buildings that are rent controlled being abandoned because you can't get a return on fixing up a lobby, a building, a plumbing system when the rent control doesn't allow you to recoup those funds. And we both have friends who are developers, who are lifelong New Yorkers, born here, raised here, developed here, who are now in Florida. And it's not because they want to be in Florida, it's because they just are too frustrated with the climate in New York. So, yes, it's creating incentives, but it's also taking away the disincentives that discourage people that even if they make the investment, it's liable to be taken from them through government action.
What about the office vacancy crisis? I mean, the A buildings are doing very well. What do we do about the B buildings?
I worry about that all the time because I work in a big high-rise in Midtown, and I'm still one of the crazy people who actually goes to work and goes in the office. And oftentimes I don't see anybody else in the office, and there are 400 lawyers, and maybe on a given day, 40 of them will be in the office. And, you know, what's going to happen to all that space when the leases are up? So I very much worry about that. Yes, there's going to be conversion from office to residential, but that's not ultimate. You don't want the offices all to be converted because there's no businesses here to support the residents. And you just have to create incentives for people to come back. And part of that is quality of life. You know, you walk down 6th Avenue and you get harassed by some mentally ill person or some homeless person begging, and you just say, I'm not going to go through this. You know, I'll keep working from home, and if they won't let me, I'll go someplace else. So quality of life is absolutely essential to bringing people back. And that's another thing with the mentally ill who are just out on the streets. We have to do far more to provide them the help they need in secure institutions. It's good for them. And, of course, it's great for the city and the people who otherwise could be victimized from them. So there are solutions.
So it's interesting because our current administration, it's not their fault that COVID happened, and it is really just an issue where people don't need to be in New York. They don't need to go to the office because there is remote now.
Right.
So if you were the governor, what incentives would you give people to come back to work? Because it sounds like that would be a very good answer.
You know, I don't know that there's a specific incentive where we could say we're going to give you X if you go to work in the office. It's more like the employers who have to do that, who have to say, we need you here. And, you know, I know some have tried to say you have to be here 5 days a week. In some cases, it's worked. A lot of cases it has worked. In other cases, it hasn't. But what is troubling to me is short term, we have this office space issue that is a real problem. Longer term, the young people aren't getting the mentorship. They're not developing the relationships. They're not seeing how, as they want to grow their careers, the importance of face-to-face contact. You know, I do Zooms all the time, and it's a great technique, a great invention, but it's not the same.
It's not.
It's not the same, and that's one of the things that employers have to tell their employees, you know, we know you don't want to come to work, but this is in your best interest and you need to. So I don't think it's a specific incentive the state should give to get people to come back to work. I think it's quality of life. When people make it easier to get there, make sure the subways and the trains work, make sure that the streets work, make sure that you're not going to be accosted by the homeless or a mentally ill or a criminal on the streets. And then beyond that, it's the employer to make the case as to why, from the employee's standpoint, it's so essential that they come to work. A lot of people don't have to. And, you know, like, I go to work, but I don't have to. I mean, I don't need to start developing relationships with people. But I just think that social interaction makes so much difference that it's why I still actually come in.
Makes us human.
Yeah,
I know when you were the governor, you were an advocate for the casinos upstate. It was the Indian River Casino, I think it was called. So do you think that'll be good for New York City? I know they're going to bring casinos here. What's your thoughts?
It can be. I have mixed feelings. It has to be done right. You have to have very tight regulation. You have to have very close controls. And I was for in the Catskills and traditional tourism reasons that were dying because the Catskills was getting killed by Atlantic City and Foxwoods in Connecticut. So I supported in the Catskills, Niagara Falls, other historic resort areas doing it. New York City, it's going to happen, and I just hope that they do it right, that they protect, that they require significant ancillary development. You don't want to just have a casino. You want to have hotels. You want to have restaurants. You want to have shops. You want to have other tourism things that make New York more attractive for people to come from everywhere, because you want it to be not the local person going in and losing their paycheck. You want it to be someone coming from Europe or South America or Asia and experiencing New York and having a different experience. It can be helpful. It can be beneficial. I just hope they do it in a way that makes it targeted towards those tourists coming here as opposed to relying on locals who should not be visiting the neighborhood casino.
Like we said, tourists and businesses.
Tourists and business.
So let's talk a little bit about Israel, which is a fiery topic right now.
Yeah.
I know you're a proponent. I know you've been a very big advocate for Israel. Do you think that we're doing enough?
I don't. I think I wish there were more that we could do. I think we are doing as much militarily. If Israel needs military help, we're going to provide it. But I don't think the president, the administration, or the country is making it plain that there is good and bad here. What Hamas did is one of the worst atrocities and worst evils since World War II, since the Holocaust. And the idea that there is some even remote justification for what they did is, to me, inexcusable. There's no justification. This is barbaric. This killing little children and old people, and not just because you're in a war, but consciously doing that and gloating about it is barbaric in a way we haven't seen since World War II. So I think the administration, all political leaders, the American people need to stand up and say there's no equivalency here. Israel has to do what needs to be done to defeat Hamas and make sure an atrocity like this does not happen again. As they have said, never again means right now, because it happened again and it cannot happen one more time. And one of the horrors of this is seeing the American universities and just the so-called educated people who are clueless, chanting horrible anti-Semitic slogans. And I happen to be with a Jewish family in Central America, and they showed me a video of their daughter going to college in Massachusetts who had emailed her father, "I'm terrified. Look what's going on in the streets." And there was this pro-Palestinian rally, and he said, "How can this be in America?" And that was exactly my reaction. How can this be in America? It is inexcusable. And I think our higher education institutions need to be held accountable for their failure to teach right and wrong, as opposed to teaching leftist ideology that has resulted in so many people just being against anything that's Western, whether it's Western Europe, Israeli values, American values. We have to learn that we're losing that battle for civilization versus barbarism, not just among Hamas, but among so-called educated people in America.
You know, you were the person that led us through the most tragic days, and the Osama bin Laden letter came out. So my parents were Holocaust survivors, and they were in Poland when this started, and they would tell me stories about the pogroms on the streets. And it's chilling similarities to what's happening today. So if you were the governor today, and you saw these protests that said, "Death to Israel, death to America," how would you handle it?
That's hate speech. First of all, I would kick out any organization that sent any sort of a letter or communication supporting Hamas from any single state university. you're gone and you're not coming back. Throw them all out. I would enforce the law. Too often we have allowed illegal demonstrations to simply because either the politicians agree with the tone of the demonstration or because they're too weak to stand up to the demonstrators to carry on. These are not demonstrations with permits. They don't go apply for an organization's ability to hold a rally. You hold an illegal demonstration spewing hate and anti-Semitism, you should be arrested. You're breaking the law, we will enforce the law.
It's not freedom of speech?
It's not freedom of speech. It's perfectly freedom of speech for you to sit in your house or in your car or in a small group of people and say anything you want. But to publicly call for hate crimes, for anti-Semitic genocide, that's intolerable, and it's not protected by the First Amendment.
Thank you. Let's move on to Ukraine. You've done so much for Ukraine, Governor Pataki. I know you have a foundation called the George Pataki Leadership Center. Tell us about it.
Well, we created it after September 11th, actually. And the idea, and we still do this, every year is we bring together all the people who worked with me, my whole team who worked on September 11th, and we honor just to get together and thank each other for what we did to get through those horrible days and weeks afterwards. And we honor a group of people, one or two or three people or organizations who are unsung heroes on that day and in the days thereafter. So that's how it started. And then when the Ukraine war broke out, we said, wow, this is horrible. Just a state invading another free state, something that was the beginning of World War II, and what's happening now. And the Ukrainians have just been so courageous in standing up to Putin and the Russian attacks. And we just said, what can we do to help? And, you think, well, we could send a check, but where does it go? And then we said, well, let's go. So literally within 3 or 4 days of the start of the war, myself and some other volunteers from the Pataki Center, we went into Ukraine and we took in some medicine and food and supplies. And we went in and met with some of the Ukrainian officials. The U.S. government said you can't go, don't go, and everything. So we went anyway. And we saw just an enormous humanitarian need, enormous. So since that time, people from the center have been back 11 times. I've been there, I think, 5 times. We've taken in everything from medicine and food to pop-up housing, temporary housing buildings that are really very good, and the government loves them. Last winter, we took in hundreds, maybe even 500 or 600 heaters to help them get through the winter. We took in generators, major generators, because the Russians are targeting their infrastructure, their power infrastructure, their heating infrastructure, to try to freeze them out. So we brought in these, it may have been close to 1,000 generators, heaters, to help them get through the winter. And I haven't been there since June, and I feel bad about that. But in June we were there. It was still kind of cold, and we were in Kyiv. And President Zelensky has set up these heating centers, and there was one in a park in Kyiv where we were. And I just happened to go in and look in the heating center, and our generator was in the heating center in Kyiv, that people would come to they could recharge their iPhones, or if it's cold and they don't have heat in their building, get warm. So it made me feel good that we're positively impacting people's lives. But there's so much more humanitarian.
Anybody have a gold star? We got to give this man a gold star.
No.
I want to ask you about how many people you think you've helped in Ukraine.
With the heaters and the generators, 100,000.
Wow. Oh, my God. Thank you. That's amazing.
Because we did take in close to 1,000 heaters, and some were massive industrial size heaters that could heat an entire block. And we don't have any paid employee, not one. Everybody who's gone, and we've, as I said, 11 trips, have all just been volunteers, and we've had people donate that have allowed us to purchase all this stuff. And now with the winter coming on, we'll do more. So what supplies are needed? It's the same thing: heating, generators, and also housing. Okay. We went to some of the battle areas, and you just see people great spirit, tremendous spirit. They're never gonna surrender. I mean, if they would fight to the last ditch, and it would be whether they were a 90-year-old or a 9-year-old, they would fight to the end. So it makes you want to do more.
Called uniting.
Yeah, exactly right.
So let's move on to a very unpleasant subject, which seems to be the biggest issue in New York.
There seem to be a bunch of
a lot of those. Let's talk about the
days.
migrants, Governor Pataki.
It's
Let's talk about the migrants. Let's talk about if you were the governor, how would you handle this?
Well, first of all, I would be every day calling the president saying, you got to shut the border. This is absolute nonsense. There millions have crossed. Millions of more will if he doesn't do anything at all. And it's just an absolute failure to uphold your oath of office, to allow us to have this completely open border. And to me, it's just inexcusable. And what is also troubling me is so long as they were in Texas and New Mexico, nobody in New York cared. But all of a sudden, 100,000, 110,000, 120, and all of us, this is a catastrophe. Well, think about Texas that has had millions of illegals crossing this area, and nobody cared when it was Texas. We need to close the border, and I would every day call the president, send a letter to the president, send people down to knock on his door, quite literally
we're
from
told
my administration.
That Mayor Adams is doing this.
Every
it's
day?
not working. That's what we're told. He sat on this report
and
last
I
week.
would make it very public. You know, we're going back to see the president. We're going to sit outside the White House until he lets us in. And if he doesn't let us in, we're coming back the next day because this is a catastrophe. The second thing I'd do is I'd end any sort of pretense that we're a sanctuary city. You know, that is just nonsensical. We're not going to uphold the law. Oh, it's a federal law. We don't like it. We're not going to uphold it. The Civil War was about that. The law has to apply everywhere in the country. You can't pick and choose which laws you want to uphold. So I would say this is not a sanctuary city. This is not a sanctuary state. We don't want you here unless you have come here legally. The third thing I would do is I'd send them to Washington. If their people are coming into the Port Authority, I'd hire buses and send them right to Washington. And, you know, it's tragic because these are people and you want to treat them with dignity and respect. Yes, they may have crossed the border illegally, but they're still human beings that you want to show compassion for. But there comes a point where compassion becomes a catastrophe when you have hundreds of thousands of people and demands that you can't meet. Our first obligation is to the school kids of New York who were failing and should be doing better as opposed to these illegals, to the poor, to the veterans. And so as tragic as it would be, I would take buses, send them to Washington saying, we love you, but we cannot afford, we're not in a position to provide help for hundreds of thousands of people who have come here illegally.
When did it become a state thing?
A state thing? It's not a state thing.
Well, when did it become a state? Yes, when did it become a state obligation?
I think a lot of that is self-inflicted. You know, back in the late 80s, there was a court decision saying that New York has a right to provide housing to the homeless. That was when there were a few thousand homeless. That court case in no way applies to hundreds of thousands of illegals that New York has to provide shelter and housing and food and everything else. And I would just treat that case as null and void. And so we have no obligation at all. So when it became a state thing, I think we have voluntarily assumed the obligation that it's a state thing. There's no law requiring us to do this. And I mean, it's the same as there's no law requiring us if a veteran is living in upstate and doesn't have a house, we don't have to provide them with everything. As a matter of policy, I would, someone who served our country like that, but there's no legal obligation. And I certainly don't think, I think we've just been way too passive in just accepting and not, like you said, Adams has gone after Biden. Yeah, he has, but not as consistently and aggressively as I would. And the governor hasn't gone after him at all. Washington should help us. That's not good enough. Make demands, take action, require them to do things.
Do you think the current investigation on Mayor Adams is because he is complaining about Washington and the border?
It's certainly possible. I don't know, but I have sufficient suspicions of how our Justice Department has treated Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. And the obvious corruption that the media has ignored and the Justice Department has ignored, to tragically be able to say it's not impossible that is the case.
Let's go on to public schools. You are an advocate for charter schools. We are the most expensive city for schools probably in the nation, with the worst test scores, and no graduation rates. Like, how do we fix this?
You got to have competition within the school system. You have to be able to get rid of incompetent teachers. And this is something, I fought hard to do. We passed a charter school law when I was governor, and that's a great story as to how we passed that. No one wanted it, but we got it done. And actually, this year is the 25th anniversary of having charter schools in New York State, and they're working great. Other states had tried it, and it was working. Our public system was inadequate. Parts were working, parts weren't working. So I've always believed in competition, whether it's in business or politics or in education. And so I just said we're going to have a charter school law in New York, and it's not just going to be law, it's going to be a great law. And teachers union hated it. The School Boards Association hated it. The Democrats hated it. The Republicans hated it because they were afraid for their suburban schools. And I just said, we're going to do it or you're not getting a pay raise. And so long story short, the night of the last day when I told them I was vetoing their pay raise if they didn't pass the public school bill, and they said, oh, you'll never do that. You'll be bipartisan hated if you veto the pay raise. And I said, that's all right, I'll veto it. The last night, around 11 o'clock at night, I got a call, and they said, okay, we'll pass your charter school bill. Follow the money. So it worked. But that competition is a great thing. Holding the teachers accountable, making sure that they actually can teach the course. And another thing that we've reversed on that I did is, and the teachers actually agree with me on this, if you have one kid who's disruptive in a classroom, that one kid is preventing 15 kids from learning who want to learn, you have to be able to remove that kid from the classroom. And we took steps to do that, and they've reversed that because, it's racist to remove a disruptive kid from the classroom. No, it's racist to prevent the other 14 kids from getting the education they deserve because you're tolerating one disruptive student. So that's another thing that can be done and that should be done. There are so many solutions, and that's the sad part is we just don't have the leadership. Period. It's that simple.
I hear everything that you're saying. Last week, as I said, Mayor Adams came on the Miller Report, and we talked about real estate because the Miller Report is a real estate podcast mostly. Mm-hmm. And personally, I'm very concerned because we are a company that sells investment properties. In the last week, people are calling, they want to sell their properties in New York because who's going to want to buy in New York City when our mayor says that everything's being cut, taxes are going up, prices are going to go completely down. They've already gone down by 20% as I see it in the last 2 weeks. If you were the governor today, right now, how would you bring that morale back? And what would you tell an investor that's sitting in India or South America or Israel, wherever they are? What would you tell an investor that would feel confident that they should invest in this country, in this city?
Mayor Adams' budget sends exactly the wrong message. Instead of things are going to get better, he's sending the message things are going to get worse. And how is that going to help people to say, I'm willing to invest in New York? You have to lay out a path to a better future. You have to have the vision of a better future. And like when it comes to taxes, I know he's got a budget deficit. I would defund all the programs for the illegals. Or I would do something dramatic, like I'd take the state's payments that they're supposed to make to the federal government for Medicaid, and I'd use them to pay for the homeless and say, sue me. Something like that.
Dramatic.
You have to do something dramatic. When the ship is sinking, you don't sit there with a cup bailing it out. You got to figure out something major to prevent it from sinking. So, that's just another crazy idea. My lawyers, if I were governor, would probably say you can't do it. We might do it anyway, but you have to show that you're serious about changing things for the better. And when you just have a budget, everything's awful, here's the budget, it's going to get worse. How are people going to react? They're going to say there's no confidence. Show a vision of what that better future can look like and how you're going to get there. And you could do it. You could do it today.
When you were the governor, you governed in a blue state and you won, and you were one of the most loved governors, one of the most loved. Do you think this city is ready for a Republican governor?
I think the people are ready for an effective leader. It's that simple. And the idea that a Republican's going to beat a Democrat in this state, no. But a Republican candidate who can lay out that vision as to how we can be the safest state again, how we can be a state where people are coming, young people are coming to New York because it's the place of excitement, where businesses are saying, I have to be in New York. This is the financial and competitive capital of the world. Then, a Republican can win. It's not because of the party, because of the vision.
So would that Republican maybe be you?
Biden's too old to be president. I mean, I have no desire to be president. But
what about governor?
Can
we endorse you right now? Can we endorse you right now?
I love my life. I'm very happy with what I'm doing.
Can we recruit you?
I'm just so discouraged. There are plenty of younger people ready to take on the challenge, I'm sure, who could lay out that path to a brilliant future for New York.
Well, I hope you will consider it, and thank you for everything you've done and continuing to do every day. Why don't you just tell the audience about your Ukraine fund, where they could dial in so that you could promote that, because we thank you again for that and for everything you've done.
Well, thank you, Suzanne. And I'll tell you, thank you. You're thanking me for all I've done. I want to thank the people for the opportunity to lead this state. It was a tremendous privilege, and I can tell you there were ups and downs, but I am extremely grateful for having had that privilege and that honor, and I'm glad it ended, in my view, well. We have the GeorgePatakiCenter.com, and if people donate, we have a particular button to help the people of Ukraine that they can hit. And as I said, 100% volunteers, with the exception of travel and security. Every nickel will go to provide humanitarian relief to the people of Ukraine.
Thank you so much, and thank you for coming on the Miller Report.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.